In our first video on urban patterns, we discussed kind of the idea of what is a city and how do we kind of classify as different urban locations and areas. And then we talked primarily about the central business district, also known as downtown or the CBD, what's found there, why it's found there, and how that's been changing over time. So in this video, we're going to talk about the distribution of people in urban areas, also known as the models of urban structure. So we're going to look at three different ones here, which historically had more of a historical purpose, and you usually find a few questions on the AP exam related to it. But these have been drastically changing, and we're going to talk more in the next video about how this relates to more things in the developing world and also into Europe in comparison with the United States. So what we want to understand is the use of these models to describe patterns of where particular people and activities are concentrated and why, and also to understand that most of these models that we're looking at were developed around Chicago in the early to mid 1900s due to the location of transportation, residential suburbs that were surrounding it, and the fact that Chicago was relatively flat. The one thing that never really got focused on with many of these models of Chicago, though, is the fact that you got a big old Great Lake right there on the border. So and that's something to keep in mind also when you're looking at the location of Chicago. So the first, urban model within Chicago is known as the concentric zone model. So concentric thinking, just a lot of different loops going around and around the major parts of town, also known as the Burgess model, based on the person that created it. And again, in the early to mid 19, I think it was 1920s or 1930s. So the idea with the concentric zone model is that the city grows from a central area, typically within that central business district, in a series of rings that is connected to zoning ordinances of where we locate and find different locations. So there are typically 5 rings, kind of as we can kind of classify here. So you got your central business district, then right around there you got your zone in transition in this little purple area. Okay, then independent workers' homes, better residences, and then commuter zones. We're thinking you're really far outlying suburbs. Think within the Twin Cities. This is like the 494, 694 loop would be that commuter zone, and then further suburbs further out from there. Okay, so within our 5 rings, go within that central business district here in the United States. There are a few residencies. They're usually high-end residencies, the more wealthy people that are living in that area. And again, this is where you're going to find most of your business services and your high-end consumer and retail. All right, and the second one, okay, is going to be, again, this purple one known as the zone of transition. Typically within housing, you're finding poor, dense housing, usually migrants or heavily residentially segregated neighborhoods, and what's the remnants of industry within these communities. This is typically where industry first developed in the cities, and still some sort of like manufacturing industries that still exist today within some urban areas of the United States. And this still actually applies pretty well to a lot of urban areas, including the Twin Cities too. In the third ring, again, kind of that first ring of suburbs, or kind of the outskirts of the downtown, or not the outskirts of the downtown, but kind of more still within the major city. We have considered more working class, so kind of middle and lower middle-ish income people in the considered working class blue collar neighborhoods. And then in the fourth ring, you have the better residencies kind of on the outskirts of town. And then in the fifth ring, again, would be the commuter zones, which would again be the suburbs. So again, within that, I also pulled up this map that we looked at way back when we talked about ethnicity, because it now begins to apply again when we start talking about zoning ordinances, when we start talking about housing and location of businesses and services within, again, the urban area, within the idea of, again, redlining and the segregation that we talked about. So again, the red areas being areas that we're pretty much, this is where we're like segregating intentional through racial covenants with people of color. So again, within Minneapolis, this was predominantly Asian Pacific Islanders. They were African Americans. They were Jews and Italians that were initially segregated into these neighborhoods. And you can kind of still see where this would go, because typically, there's your central business district in downtown, and right around it is your zone in transition, all right, which would again predominantly be in these red areas. And then you have your, more worker class homes in the yellow, and then the better zones that are still in the city in the blue areas. All right, and then the fifth one would be, the surrounding suburbs. At this point in Minneapolis, this would be like St. Louis Park, Golden Valley, Richfield, Columbia Heights, St. Anthony, and in St. Paul, you're talking about, Maplewood, Roseville, South St. Paul, West St. Paul, Mendota Heights, those types of places that would again be fitting here. So the housing and the socioeconomic status improve or typically go up, which means the cost of housing and the level of socioeconomic status or income levels typically rise the further out you are from the central business district. So we know, obviously, again, few people do live in that CBD, and typically more wealthier people, or those that do live there are fairly wealthy. But again, the best homes are going to be considered further and further out from that central business district, all right? And the best services, the best access, and all those things are typically, again, considered in there, all right? And so each group or land use moves further and further out over time when it's considered incompatible with the activities that do not cluster together. So i.e., manufacturing and high-rise apartments typically don't go well together. Neither do suburban homes and manufacturing. So again, that's why this is constantly in transition as you begin to see things move further and further out. So within the second model, it takes, all three of these models follow the same general concept, but again, develop into different blocks and models of, where do you find these things and why. So within the sector, also known as the Hoyt model, okay, cities develop in sectors of certain activities and extend from the CBD, growing along with transportation routes with high rent sectors along natural amenities. So again, kind of here in stage one, you have your central business district, okay, that kind of follows out from there. And then two is your transportation and industry that follows along a core line there. So if this was, again, Minneapolis, St. Paul, or typically, let's just go with Minneapolis, it would be I-94 that cuts kind of right through here, or even Highway 55 that goes into Minneapolis. And if you drive your way along Highway 55, you find the remnants of industry and manufacturing that located in Minneapolis, or parts of it anyway. So that actually plays in pretty well with, again, those two major transportation routes that go through the city. And then in 3, you have your, low-class residential neighborhoods, so more townhomes, lower-level apartments, older single or more cheap, or older, cheaper single-family homes, duplexes, places like that. So again, this thing like North Minneapolis, parts of the Seward neighborhood would be probably considered within this. And then your 4, you have your middle-class residential areas. So this would kind of be maybe areas of Northeast Minneapolis, parts of South Minneapolis, and then your high-class residential. So this is like your Linden Hills, people that live kind of along the Chain of Lakes area would probably be considered within that high-class residential part of Minneapolis. So I think, from my perspective and how well I know the city, I would say the Hoyt sector model probably fits pretty well with the layout of Minneapolis. And that's just, again, my 2 cents on how well I know the city. So then we get the final one, the multiple nuclei model. Okay, a city that includes more than just one center or nodal area or growth pole that activities revolve around. Because remember, we've talked about the fact that many urban locations predominantly focus on, while they offer a variety of services and types of jobs, typically they focus on a few different types of industries that they're really concentrated in an urban area. Again, that kind of connects back to rank size model and the location of where you're going to find these things and how that clusters specific talent pools around the country. Again, as we kind of focus on services. So again, you have your CBD, but then you can kind of see all the different things that are located around these areas. So that includes, wholesale and light manufacturing, which again, you do find kind of, again, on the outskirts of the CBD. You have your low-class residential places, right, kind of along the outskirts of that, medium-class residential, high-class residential, all right, kind of, again, along the outskirts of the area, heavy manufacturing, okay, would be predominantly like kind of right here, outlying business districts. So again, kind of think, other areas of where you find different types of business clusters, a residential suburb and an industrial suburb. So an industrial suburb would be one that focuses, again, on manufacturing outside the main city, but still heavily in industry or factory-wise. So that would be something like South St. Paul with meatpacking would be considered an industrial suburb, or at least historically an industrial suburb, right? And the reason for this model is that some activities are attracted to particular areas, others try to avoid them, all right? Because again, a lot of this does not always overlap or go well together. So again, high-rise apartments, again, not very heavily concentrated next to heavy industry and manufacturing. So thus where you're going to find these things. And typically what unfortunately you see within the multiple nuclei model, and also again, just main urban areas and their setups, is the fact that you will typically find low-class residential areas. So again, thinking, within, low-class residential here and low-class residential here, that zone in transition, you'll typically find closer to areas of manufacturing, areas of higher levels of pollution, of garbage output, areas that are considered warmer, more the urban heat island effect, closer to those factories than you would with people of other types of incomes. Again, more of the upper class type of income that would kind of fit. You would not necessarily see those close to factories and manufacturing industry. All right. So examples of the centers or nodes that you would find within a given city would be, airports, universities, housing, business centers, parks. Typically, there's not a whole lot of overlap where you find an airport next to a park, but universities will be very close to housing and oftentimes be close to business centers. Think about what's around the University of Minnesota and what's not around there. Okay. Then alongside the multiple nucleon model, kind of within this concept here, we get the idea of what we call edge cities. And so an edge city forms along the highway intersections as suburban residences for people who used to commute towards the central, or still do, who commute towards the central business district. Because again, over time, if people could commute and work downtown and get all their fun activities every now and then out there, but they didn't want to live again in the central business district. They wanted again their big house with a lawn and a lot of space. They would be, and again, further away on those transportation routes along, I-94, 494, 35W. So they were able to, go further away or live further away, and they'd be commuting longer and longer and longer. And what follows them out there would be, again, those more retail centers, the shopping malls that kind of developed outside the CBD. So again, think about the locations of Southdale Mall, the Egan Outlet, Rosedale, Southdale, Ridgedale, all the Dales, kind of in the Twin Cities area. Rosedale too, I think I might have said that already. But again, all of them being located further and further away, further away from the central business district as those suburbs grow, and then the business services follow out there. But the primary target is still within those central business districts. But again, you find other nodes and locations and things found in other locations and suburbs as the city itself develops. So in the next video, we'll start talking about the urban areas outside of North America. So how does it look in Europe, and then how does it look in more of the developing countries as well? So hopefully you can take this idea of the multiple nucleon model and think about where these locations fit and how they apply, or if they do apply to the Twin Cities, and how these might be more historically accurate than more present day, or if they still have present day usage within that. So again, kind of apply your knowledge of the Twin Cities, and if you know any other major cities, how this might fit or how it may not fit. So something to consider within the critical thinking piece. Think about how this might apply on an FRQ. So take that as a hint.